Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the next session of the Pivot Conference. My name is Rohit Koshi. I'm the co-chair of the conference, and it's my pleasure to introduce Acharya Prashant today. Acharya Prashant is a champion of social spiritual awakening in the world, and he's an acclaimed Vedanta philosopher. However, I have known Acharya since college days when we knew him as PT, Prashant Tripathi. We graduated together, we were in the same department, and I did a lot of courses with him. PT was always different. He was always full of energy. We knew him for his wit. He had a mastery over language. He was very good in debating, poetry, and theatre. Always down to earth. He had a practical approach to life. Led a very active campus life, right from table tennis, theatre, and even politics. He actually knew every student in his junior batch by their name, city, and other background information. He was super intelligent. He would optimize his time versus marks return on investment. He would borrow notes from his classmates and actually scored more than them in the exams. Prashant was born in Agra. He's won many awards in school, including the prestigious NTSC scholarship. After IIT, he cleared the civil service exam. And then he also cleared the CAT and he went to IIM Ahmedabad to do an MBA. After that, he worked for 3-4 years in what he calls the wilderness in corporate life. And then he started his journey with Advait Life to take the wisdom of ancient texts to college students. He has now written more than 70 books, uploaded more than 10,000 videos online, and almost 5 million minutes of content is consumed every day. So welcome, Prashant. And we also have Dr. Chatterjee, who is a 2014 batch IIT Bombay and IIT Bombay graduate and PhD from University of California, Irvine in 2019. So over to you, Dr. Chatterjee, you can start. And welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Rohit.
Anupam, you're on mute.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So I'll start today's discussion with a question. So, sir, the theme for today's interaction is inner growth. So usually when we talk of growth, we talk of external growth. So, for example, for an individual, growth usually means job promotions, better income, more comforts, etc. For a company, growth may mean growing in profits. For an institution, it may mean better rankings or greater enrollment. And scaling up for an economy, it may mean greater GDP and so on. So given this context for external growth, how do we define inner growth for a human being? And what is its relationship to external growth? If you could please throw a light on this.
Namaste, Anupam. You talked of external growth. What does that usually consist of? We earn, we accumulate, we learn, we gain knowledge, and we gain an experience. And most of it we call as external growth. Which is all very fine. Just that along with it, we need to keep asking for whom is the accumulation? For whose sake are we gaining experience or knowledge or money or power? And when you ask that question, then the whole situation shifts to a different plane. Because obviously, we do not earn money or gain power for the sake of money or power. We do not gain knowledge or experience for the sake of knowledge or sake of experience. We do it all for ourselves, we do it for our own welfare. So that question, for whom, kiske liye, is extremely important. And when you ask that question, you discover that even when you are striving for external growth, you, the person, the striver, the seeker, is actually at the center of all your efforts. And like in any process that consumes effort, time, energy, and must produce a certain output, here in this process also, the process of external growth, we need to keep measuring whether the external growth process has delivered the final output. And the final output is the welfare of the self. I go for money, I go for power, I want to learn something, I do it for myself. So even as I go about accumulating all that I do in the world, I need to constantly ask myself, to what extent has it really benefited me? So I, the subject, is at the center of all that I do with respect to the various objects in the world. So that's inner growth, being able to clearly see to what extent have all my worldly external endeavors facilitated my internal well-being. Now, what is this thing, internal well-being? You see, we are born with certain tendencies, and those tendencies do not let us stay at peace. If you look at a newborn baby, it already has fear. It already has greed in a rudimentary, in a nascent form. Primordial jealousy, ignorance, these things are already present in us even as we are born. And these tendencies, these physical tendencies, become all the more harmful and exacerbated under the influence of social conditioning. Because as we go through life, we gather experiences, we gather knowledge, and we gather a sense of right and wrong. And mostly that does not come from places that can help or further our inner growth. So internally, we all need a lot of work, because internally we all have a existent mess even as we begin the journey of life. That mess needs to be cleaned up, that inner chaos needs to be sorted out, and that is inner growth. So inner growth is essentially a process in which you reduce or drop or rectify or cleanse a lot of stuff that you were born with, a lot of stuff that you later on unfortunately picked up along the process of life, stuff that was not worthy of being picked up, yet it did get into your inner system. So inner growth then is a misnomer. It is not a process of growth actually. Nothing grows. Nothing becomes bigger in inner growth. In inner growth, there has to be a reduction. In inner growth, there has to be a simplification. In inner growth, you drop a lot of things. You become smaller internally. Like a tumor that you are carrying within. When do you say that you have grown in health with respect to that tumor? When the size of the tumor reduces. So that's inner growth. The size of the inner tumor has to reduce. And all external efforts have to be made keeping this inner metric in mind. Stuff that I'm doing externally, in business, in profession, in relationships, wherever, with respect to books, knowledge, whatsoever I am doing from morning till evening every day, to what extent is it contributing to reducing me from within? That's how you should look at the utility, the efficacy of whatever you have been putting your time and energy in. I gave it so much time, I gave it energy, I worked on it. Did it really help me in an internal way? Because I did not do it for doing sake. I did it because I had a strong internal reason. And that's the only reason really that one can have, because we all exist within ourselves. So all that we do is fundamentally, and I'm being repetitive here, I know, but it needs to be emphasized. All that we do is for our sake, and I do not exist outside of myself. So I need to have one eye always on myself. I need to be self-observant. I need to keep asking, what is all this doing to me? What is all this doing to me? So yeah, that's inner growth. I hope I have been successful to some extent in clarifying.
Anupam, you're on mute.
Thank you. Yes, sir. So when we talk of inner growth or inner wellness, it's not something that is unheard of. It is something which is in the common parlance. So if we go to a lot of neo spiritual teachers, neo spirituality, they talk of inner growth and inner wellness. There usually inner wellness is equated with stress relief or relaxation and techniques thereof. So if one thinks about it, inner growth in that sense is considered important only to the extent that which it supplements outer growth. So outer growth still remains the primary objective. So my question would be, does stress relief and relaxation and techniques thereof, do they have any relevance towards what inner growth means in the real sense?
Yeah, good question. Thanks. You see, this internal mess that I talked of and quite dramatically referred to as an internal tumor, just for the sake of effect, is not an easy thing to get rid of. We are born with it. It's a part of our body. It resides in each of our cells. These tendencies that I'm talking of, ignorance, attachment, fear, greed, jealousy, and so many other things. They live within us. We are carrying them through the process of evolution. In fact, we share those tendencies with every living organism in the world. So they are quite animalistic, these things that we carry. They are animalistic and deeply entrenched. So, and that you would understand is also the reason why so few people even attempt to get rid of these things. And when you do attempt to get rid of them, when you do undertake the mighty battle, the giant project of challenging your inner self to become better, to reduce in size, to drop all its baggage, or most of it, then it's not easy. The self refuses to grow up. It wants to remain the way it was. And it says that if any growth is to happen, it must happen in the external domain. Internally, I will remain how I have always been. Internally, I'll remain afraid. I'll remain insecure. I will remain covetous. But externally, I will gather this, reach there, climb to that position. That's the position, that's the statement of the self, the inner self. You could call it the ego or whatever. So when you do want to grow internally, it involves pain. It actually involves taking on stress for a long time, deliberately, with resolution. So the person who really wants to have inner growth will not be afraid of stress. In fact, he'll be prepared to go through stress. He'll be prepared to invite stress of the right kind, mind you. It is this stress of the right kind that has been truly, classically called as tapasya or sadhana. The very word tapasya, at its root is tap. And one of its meanings is going through heat. You pass through fire knowingly, so that all that is unworthy within you gets incinerated, burnt out. Obviously, your system would not like that. Your system, your entrenched tendencies, they will oppose that. So then there is inner conflict, and you'll have to bear that conflict. I'm not in favor of stress, obviously. But what I'm saying is that usually what happens is that in the name of avoiding stress, we tend to avoid the right action as well. Such is man's predicament, that right action would involve a lot of stress. Wrong action that is harmful to your real well-being, does involve stress. But contrary to popular belief, right action may involve a higher degree of stress than wrong action does. So you have to be ready to take that challenge on. Right? The easier path is usually not the better one. Also, you see, if one is doing in life stuff that is needless, then it would bring its own share of stress and tension along with it. Now, what happens is that there is a temptation to seek a cheap remedy to this situation. And the cheap remedy is to take an analgesic, some kind of a painkiller, right? So, for example, I might be in a job that puts me in a lot of stress. And that stress is quite unwarranted. It is not stress of the kind that facilitates any higher inner purpose. It's just that I'm at the wrong place, in the wrong environment, wrong company, wrong people. And so I'm obviously stressed out. Now, what do? I turn towards one of the popular meditation techniques floating in the market. And to some extent, those techniques work in a very superficial way, in a very short-term way. So I return from the bad job that I'm doing, and then in the night, I sit down for meditation, or in the morning before I leave for office, I sit down to meditate for half an hour. And that relaxes my system to some extent temporarily and enables me to continue in that same job, same profession, same environment, which is in fact bad for me. Now, this kind of stress relief or this kind of meditation is actually becoming an enabler for the wrong thing. So, there is a difference between stress and stress. Whatever one does in life, it does involve some stress. One must know the right stress to choose. Just as one must know the right thing to choose in any condition, in any sphere of life. Right? So stress is not necessarily a bad thing. Also, stress to a great extent is inevitable. Spirituality is not, initially at least, about avoiding stress. A state of peace starts descending on the spiritual person after a while, sometimes after a long while. Till then, one must pass through fire. Also, please remember that peace is not the appearance of peace. The spiritual person will take on mighty projects, and that will necessarily involve conflict. We are not talking of fairy tales here. We are talking of the real world. And in the real world, when you want to do something important, something really meaningful, there is conflict. Peace, therefore, cannot mean an appearance of peace. Peace, therefore, cannot be about that typical peaceful face that we see on idols and in paintings and pictures and in popular narratives and depictions. No. Peace is something that inwardly allows you to continue doing the right thing, even when externally there is a total lack of peace. Externally, there might be noise, chaos, great turbulence, and still you manage to stay put. That is peace. In that sense, peace or freedom from stress is indistinguishable from truth, from silence, from all the great qualities that one associates with spirituality. Peace is not about carrying that sublime smile and walking around like you have nothing on your shoulders. no loads, no baggages, no tensions. No, that's just an appearance of peace. It's quite deceptive. More importantly, it's self-deceptive.
Thank you, sir. That was quite enlightening. It clarified a lot of doubts which people generally have. So lastly, I would also like to ask you that it's very clear that outer growth has its own drawbacks. When people start going for outer growth, they start to consume. And excessive consumption leads to global problems like climate change, pandemics. In fact, scientists are very clear that unless something drastic is done, man is on the verge of extinction. And as we discussed, internal growth also has a great value, but there is a certain amount of outer growth that is also required for internal growth. So can there be a middle path somewhere where someone can have a fine balance between outer growth and inner growth, something like sustainable consumption or something in like that? Can you throw some light on that to conclude?
Yes, you see that middle point that you're talking of, that great optimum, it emerges naturally on its own. All that you have to do is you must continuously keep asking yourself whether all your external endeavors are contributing to your internal welfare. You said inner growth is also important. That needs to be put in perspective. Inner growth is the only thing that's important. It's not one of the things to be taken care of. It is the only thing to be taken care of. I might be sounding a bit absolutist here, but if you will think about it, you might agree. Ultimately, you see, you are yourself, and all that you are doing is for your own sake. So what else can be important except your own welfare? It might sound selfish here, but only till the point you do not meditate on the meaning of the self. And when you go into what the self is really about, then you might find that real and pure selfishness is not a bad word at all. In fact, it's a great thing. So you just keep asking. I'm accumulating this. I'm traveling to that place, and all of that has carbon consequences. You fly to some place. You raise a big house. You want better air conditioning. You want your second or third SUV, and all of that has its own carbon consequences. Most importantly, you want to have a baby. What is usually not mentioned or discussed in these circles is that the one thing that contributes most violently to the climate crisis is growth in population. When you bring one body to the world, it's not one body you have brought here. It's an entire series. So if you want to reduce your carbon footprint by, let's say, 100 units, then up to 70 or 80 units of that can be achieved just by having a baby less. Otherwise, you may keep on doing things that appear quite holy, quite public-minded, even sanctimonious. They amount not to much. As you said, 70 to 80% of your contribution towards arresting anthropogenic global warming can come from just refraining from having kids or having fewer kids. So these are the questions one has to ask. Do I really need that global trip? Have I seen enough of my homeland? Do I really need to fly? Do I really need to plan for one more kid? Do I really need to do this, do that? We all, we are pretty aware people. We know to what extent carbon is released in what kind of activity. And if we are asking those questions, not the question of whether the activity that I am proposing to do or planning to do would release carbon, but first the question that whether the activity that I am planning to do is really needed for me, then we'll find that automatically the carbon footprint of our existence would become smaller. So these things go hand in hand, right life and right kind of coexistence with the environment. A fellow who is living rightly is automatically living sustainably. So right life and sustainable life, they go together. The corollary is a bit unnerving. If today we are leading the kind of lives that would potentially require a dozen Earths to fulfill our demand of resources, then surely we are not leading the right life. If right life is sustainable life, then surely unsustainable life has to be a wrong life too, wrong internally. It means that today, if our footprint is so big, if we are releasing copious volumes of methane and water vapor and obviously carbon dioxide and several pollutants as well, oxides of sulfur, nitrogen, then surely even internally we cannot be happy. We'll have to accept that this equation exists. One who is polluting the environment would also not be internally joyful or peaceful. One who is contributing to biodiversity loss or hacking down of jungles would also be leading a pretty miserable internal life. The relationships would be bad. The sleep would be bad. The entire inner life would be messed up. So that optimum, that sweet spot will emerge where you can consume and you consume rightly, where the consumption is not blind, where you know why exactly you are consuming, and Prakriti, nature, does quite generously allow for that extent of consumption. There is no problem. Every living being in the world does consume and does modify or manipulate in the positive context, manipulate nature, Prakriti, for its physical sustenance. Even a bird or a squirrel makes its nest. In summers, even dogs, the usual street dogs we have around, they dig the soil to have a certain cool place for them to rest in. So every organism is doing certain things with the environment, with his ecology. Man too is entitled to do that. We don't have to really go back to the jungle. But the question is, how much are we entitled to consume? And how many of us are entitled to consume? If 8 billion of us, who are going to be 11 billion in the near future, within the next 2 or 3 decades, if 8 or 11 billion of us decide to have a per capita consumption that mirrors that of US or Japan or Germany, then needless to say, we are already doomed, right? So we need to be fewer, and we need to be consuming with an eye on our true welfare. Do I really need that third vehicle? What is it going to bring to my life? I already had two. What did they bring to me? And what is it that they did not bring to me that this third one would? These are the kind of questions that an aware and intelligent person needs to ask. And when you lead a life that is very self-aware, then you find that your carbon footprint automatically goes down, even without planning. And I would just take a minute to also add a small warning here. If you do not lead internally right lives, then legislation is not going to deliver the goods. If we think that global meets and international summits or legislations from the side of governments are going to tackle this problem, it's not going to happen, because governments are elected by people. It's a largely democratic world. And if people want to consume, governments will not be very effective in checking that consumption. Governments cannot antagonize the people beyond a point. So it's the population that has to be awakened. And the population cannot be awakened just by telling them that, you're doing all these things and that's causing harm to the environment. They'll come up with counter arguments. They'll say, fine, we'll go to Mars and settle there. Already, many of our poster boy billionaires are saying that the earth is no more good to live in. So we are now going to colonize Mars. The planet we have made very inhabitable, inhospitable. So let's quit the planet. And that's what they'll say. They'll say if there's going to be mass extinction, it's nothing new. It has happened several times before. So why should we trouble ourselves just to avert mass extinction? And they can come up with a lot of arguments if you just keep emphasizing on environmental welfare. They will say, we do not want environmental welfare at all. Why must we care about this little speck of dust in universe called planet Earth? We have so many other places to look at, From global, we will become universal. When you used to talk of something national, they said, no, we don't want to have a national identity, we want to have a global identity. Now that the globe has been burned down, they'll say we want to have a universal identity. We'll move to some other planet, then they'll move to some other galaxy. Ultimately, all this will lead to just one big black hole. So the action has to be internal. Only that will succeed. I'm not coming from a moral point of view. I'm coming from a very pragmatic place. If you want success, even in the external dimension, you have to begin within, because that's where you are.
Thank you, sir, for the very enlightening discussion. I'm sure all of us have a lot to take away from the discussion. So with that, I would like to transfer the conversation to the host for the concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Acharya, for your very enlightening message. And great to meet you again after so many years. And we'll stay in touch. All the best, and thank you, everyone, for attending this
session. Namaste, Koshi, and it was great seeing you here and speaking to everybody. I'm really thankful. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you.